Everybody, grab a monkey. It's time for Iron Man 3. Hello everyone, this is B Harper from supermarcy.com, and as you could see from the introduction, Iron Man 3. Iron Man 3 to me is perhaps the best written of the Iron Man trilogy. Then again, that's not exactly saying too much, but nonetheless, this film isn't about Iron Man. This film is about Tony Stark. This film is about Tony Stark finding himself after a crisis and finally coming to terms with who he is, what he does, and what he needs to do. Iron Man 3 takes place after the events of the Avengers, so if you have seen the Avengers, you will know what Tony Stark went through. So in Iron Man 3, he is essentially suffering extended PTSD syndrome, and it's not good for his health, it really isn't. The only time of which he can feel safe and confident in himself is when he is working on an Iron Man suit or when he's wearing an Iron Man suit. And very early on in the film, you actually see Tony Stark start to regress, and he's out in public and he's starting to get overwhelmed by, you know, the world around him, the sounds, everything, and he sequesters himself inside of an Iron Man suit, and then that really gives you an indication about how severely damaged the character is. And this film more or less dedicates its time to Tony Stark bringing himself back together after something terrible happening. And it also involves the Extremis storyline. The Extremis storyline is one of the more prominent of the Iron Man mythos, and I won't go too far into it because, quite frankly, I don't want to bore you, and also I don't have the time to get into the in-depth stuff. But the Extremis is essentially, in a sense, it's like the super soldier serum from Captain America, only it has far more remarkable properties. That is to say, regeneration, glowing eyes, and the ability to kill yourself, in a sense. So, as I said, the film takes off after the events of the Avengers. So Tony Stark, you know, gets himself into trouble again. One of them involves the Mandarin. The Mandarin is an international terrorist, played by Ben Kingsley. And I gotta say, when I saw the trailers to this film, when it involved the Mandarin, I was like, oh, one, they're including the Mandarin, which is great because the Mandarin is one of the Iron Man's chief foes, and two, this interpretation of the Mandarin is kind of similar to Bane in terms of how Kingsley enunciated his words. He's like, now it's time for your final lesson, Mr. Stark, you know, that sort of thing. And that's something I really like about this movie, is that it tends to incorporate the very real threat of terrorism, and you know how terrorism is portrayed on the news, and how the media becomes a conduit for, you know, communication between the terrorist and their opponents, and, you know, drawing everybody into it essentially because nothing is safe in the media. So Tony Stark decides to say fuck it, because he isn't going to be threatened by the Mandarin, so in an essence, like, he throws himself into the line of fire. So Pepper Potts gets, you know, put into a compromised position, so he has to make sure that he keeps Pepper safe. Now, this also involves Aldrich Killian, played by Guy Pearce. Guy Pearce, I think one of the benefits about being an Australian is that you know one of your favourite actors, you know, from when they first started. Guy Pearce used to be in Neighbours, and Neighbours is basically like a soap opera, right? So a lot of our Australian talent actually had their roots in that television series. So to see Guy Pearce be on Ramsay Street on the sort of soap opera to all the way on the big screen, and Guy Pearce has played a phenomenal amount of different roles. The guy is incredibly versatile. So for him to take another step into being in a big-time comic book movie, that is just something that makes me so proud to see, because he's good. He makes for a very good character in a comic book movie. He understands the character of Aldrich Killian. His scene with Pepper Potts in Stark Industries is especially notable because, to begin with, we see Aldrich Killian as some sort of geeky sort of computer scientist sort of thing, and I'll get into that a little bit later. So he comes to talk to Pepper, but he ends up somewhat seducing her, and she's actually started to kind of, you know, feel you know, those sorts of feelings towards him. Now, at this point in time, Pepper is committed to Tony. Like, she obviously loves him so much. And she's trying to help him through his PTSD, but, you know, things aren't that easy. So when Aldrich Killian decides to take her for a bit of a ride, like with his little holographic balls, of course the movie capitalizes on that by making ball jokes, but I digress. Killian becomes another factor of Tony Stark's life, because before Tony Stark became, you know, Iron Man, before he got involved in the terrorist attack in the first movie, he was living the dream of the American playboy. So Killian is a struggling sort of computer scientist. Like, he is trying so hard to make the break, and he sees Tony Stark as an inspiration, but he tries to talk to Tony, and Tony doesn't give him the time of day. So you see a sequence in a flashback that Killian, like, contemplates killing himself, because he's in that position which his final vestige of hope has pretty much, you know, brushed him off as if he were, you know, like a fly or an insect. And once again, I've got to give credit to a film that treats a topic of suicide, you know, very sensitively. Yeah, it's actually a very well done scene, and I found myself being affected by it. But I should get back to the big part of the movie. As I said, this movie isn't so much about Iron Man. That is to say, for about half of the film, Tony Stark does not wear his Iron Man suit, because in an attack orchestrated by the Mandarin, he finds himself, you know, with a broken down Iron Man suit. So he's trying to repair it, while at the same time he's attempting to get on top of his problems. And around about the middle half of the movie, this is Tony Stark rediscovering himself as a human being. He's starting to realise that, no, he cannot depend on becoming Iron Man in order to be, you know, complete. So he spends most of his time, you know, trekking through America on Christmas Eve, by the way. I can't believe I forgot to mention this. The director is Shane Black. Shane freaking Black. And as you know, with most of Shane Black's work, he tends to hate Christmas. By that I mean, something terrible usually happens on Christmas Eve in his movie. I don't know what it is with him in Christmas, but it works. I love it. Shane Black really does elevate the material. Not to say Jon Favreau did nothing in the first two films. He did. Like, he's the one who took a chance on the Iron Man franchise and actually lifted it off the ground, and it worked. But Shane Black managed to take a distinctly more complex storyline in terms of character and, you know, what was going on, and turn it into something else. It's not just a summer blockbuster action movie. It is a full-blown drama, but it's done in such a way that it doesn't force it down your throat. And I love it when a movie does that. I love it when you can just sit back and watch a movie and subconsciously start to soak in what it's all about. And Iron Man isn't about Iron Man, it is about the man, Tony Stark. And just to see all these elements in play about terrorism and psychoanalysis... I can't speak. Psychoanalytical theory. You know, there's some sort of a great subtext going on in this movie about, you know, we tend to build up identities for ourselves. We take on different types of personalities. We take on, you know, interests and personal designs and that sort of thing, and it becomes a part of us. So what happens when those things are stripped away from you? You start to sort of lose a sense of yourself. You're not quite sure about who you are or what you want. This is something that we all face. And to see a comic book film take on something so surprisingly deep and make it accessible to everybody, you know, without being preachy, without being too sort of academic, that is incredibly commendable. And even though it's a drama, it still has some great action. Towards the end of the movie, when Tony Stark finally gets back his Iron Man suit, when he's finally got himself back on his feet and saying, you know what, I am Tony Stark now. I accept all I have done and all that has happened, but it doesn't mean I have to wallow in it. And on the final act of the film takes place on a ship of sorts, and Iron Man like summons in all of these Iron Man suits, and just to see them sort of like line up in formation, it's like, oh my god, that's so cool. And the way they managed to incorporate all those elements into an action sequence, when you have that many things, you really got to keep track about where they are in order to keep the audience interested, as well as to make sure that you don't lose them in the process. And before that point, before Tony Stark gets back into a functioning Iron Man suit, he actually depends on his own ingenuity when he's going through a compound. Something very precious to him is being held there, right? So he goes in there with his own sort of technology that he's sort of like worked on the fly, and it's kind of like a guerrilla sort of movie. Like, he's resorting to guerrilla tactics and guerrilla technology, and it's so refreshing to see a character who is stripped essentially of his superpowers, but, you know, the real superpower is his brain and his hands, right? So it's just really inspiring to see something like that in a superhero movie, because when you see a superhero film, the thing that you expect is to see, you know, enormous acts of daring do, something that, you know, that's beyond your imagination. But in this case, you just have a man who is trying his hardest to get through a difficult situation, and it works gangbusters. I should take the time out to speak about the co-stars. I already spoke about Guy Pearce. Ben Kingsley as a Mandarin, fantastic. I'm not going to say anything at all in case there are some of you out there who still haven't seen the movie, in which I say please do so, because Ben Kingsley is amazing. Rebecca Hall and Gwyneth Paltrow. And that's another really cool thing about this movie. You have two female characters who have had an intimate relationship with Tony Stark, okay? Both of them were or are his girlfriend. And this film does not resort to some sort of fetishistic catfight, right? Because you actually see these two women get along. And they form a connection, you know? And they don't have Tony Stark there to talk about. They actually talk among themselves. You know what? I think this film kind of passes the Benchel test. Isn't that cool? Who else is there? Oh, Jon Favreau as Froggy. Like, is his name Froggy? I'm sorry, I forget his name. I'm speaking too fast. I tend to overthink or underthink what I say when I'm saying something. I apologise. But his character in this movie, it's so great that Shane Black still, you know, included the guy who lifted the franchise off the ground. It's like, you know what? I love you, buddy. I respect your work, and I want to put you in this movie. Like, his character is a very sort of a minor role, but it's still incredibly crucial towards Tony Stark's sort of rebirth, as it were. So that's really cool. Yeah, James Badge Dale as one of the supporting characters. He's not really in the movie a lot. That is to say, he's not really a huge character, but he makes for a very good henchman. Some of his best scenes involve him fighting Tony Stark, or, you know, making a general shit of himself. It's really, really good. So I would definitely say that Iron Man 3 is, without a doubt, perhaps the best story of the Iron Man franchise. And it's got fantastic elements. It approaches its subjects very well. Great performances, all up. Just really great sort of character interactions, and just how it just explores all these various elements that you normally don't see in a straight-up superhero film. So I give Iron Man 3 a 4.5 out of 5. Actually, no. I give it a 5 out of 5. The reason why I say that is because of the reasons I just listed. It's not very often you see a sort of a spunky sort of a superhero film that still has some dark elements but doesn't allow it to cloy it. You know, it doesn't bog itself down with all being done the dumps and dark and gritty. Like, it has, you know, sequences of that, but it's counteracted by, you know, scenes of lightness and comedy and like spark, and it's so good. Oh! I can't believe I forgot this. Don Cheadle as Iron Patriot / War Machine. Okay, brief note. I'm so grateful to see him back, but I miss the War Machine costume. I really do. But his interactions with Tony Stark are awesome, as per usual. So yeah, that was my thoughts on Iron Man 3. So since we are now in Phase 2, it is not too long before Age of Ultron comes out and Phase 3 begins after Ant-Man. See you later, guys.